Ladies and gentlemen, let's get real. People will only treat you the way you allow them to. If you feel drained, used, or controlled, it's not just bad luck. You're likely dealing with emotional manipulation. And unless you spot it, you'll keep falling into the same trap. Today, I'm giving you 7 clear signs. If you recognize them, it's time to put up boundaries and stop letting people use you. Guilt trips, they twist situations to make you feel guilty for saying no. You're not selfish for protecting your time. You're smart playing the victim. Everything is always someone else's fault, never theirs. Be careful. If you're always rescuing, they're always controlling. Silent treatment, they withhold affection or communication to punish you. That's not love. It's power play over complimenting, then criticizing. They build you up only to tear you down. That's not flattery. It's control disguised as care, making you question yourself. Are you sure? I don't think you remember it right. This is gaslighting. If someone keeps making you doubt your own reality, walk away. Using your empathy against you, they know you're kind, so they weaponize your compassion. Stop confusing empathy with obligation. Conditional love or approval, they give you affection only when you obey. That's not love, it's manipulation. Here's the truth. Manipulators don't take power, you hand it to them. And you take it back the moment you stop playing their game. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to your mind, your time, or your energy. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And if someone can't give you that, you don't need them in your life. So stop letting people use you. Stand firm. Protect your energy and never, ever apologize for choosing yourself. Manipulators don't take power, you hand it to them. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly in the little compromises you make, in the silences you keep, and in the times you say yes when everything inside you wanted to say no. Most people don't realize they're giving away their power until it's too late, until they're already exhausted, drained, and questioning who they are. That's the nature of manipulation. It's subtle, it's strategic, and it feeds off the moments when you second guess yourself. The truth is, no one can dominate your thoughts, emotions, or decisions unless you allow it. Manipulators rely on you to keep giving in, to keep doubting yourself, to keep letting them set the rules of the game. Think about the last time you felt guilty for setting a boundary. Maybe you said you couldn't help someone, and immediately they made you feel as though you'd let them down, as if your worth depended on how much you sacrificed for them. That's not them taking your power. It's you handing it over by agreeing to play along with their guilt trip. The power dynamic only exists if you accept the role they assign you. And that's the difficult part, because manipulators are skilled at making you believe you're the one in control, when in reality, they're pulling strings behind the scenes. The exchange of power doesn't look like a fight. It looks like endless compromises that don't feel like compromises at first. You tell yourself you're being kind, you're being understanding, you're being the bigger person. And while compassion is valuable, when it's used against you, it becomes a weapon. Manipulators know this. They know you care about other people's feelings. They know you don't want to be seen as selfish. They use that knowledge as leverage to keep you compliant. And the more you give, the more they take, until your voice barely exists in the relationship. Every time you silence yourself to keep the peace, you hand over power. Every time you accept behavior that makes you uncomfortable, you hand over power. Every time you choose to stay quiet instead of speaking your truth, you hand over power. It's not a single decision. It's a series of small decisions that accumulate until you're trapped in someone else's version of your life. And when you look back, you realize that the manipulator never forced you into submission. They simply waited for you to give them permission. The psychology of manipulation is built on exploitation of your natural tendencies. If you're someone who avoids conflict, they'll press until you fold. If you're someone who craves approval, they'll dangle their acceptance in front of you like a prize. If you're someone who is deeply loyal, they'll twist loyalty into obligation. That's how they win. They don't break your will. They convince you to surrender it. You need to see how power is transferred, because once you understand the mechanics, you can stop it. The manipulator thrives in the shadows of your uncertainty. They thrive when you're unsure of your decisions, when you're constantly questioning if you're doing the right thing. They amplify your doubt, because the moment you're second guessing yourself, you'll defer to their version of reality. And that's where the handover happens. You start prioritizing their voice over your own. The shift is almost invisible at first. You think you're just making compromises, just being considerate, just adjusting to someone else's needs. But those adjustments slowly chip away at your identity. Over time, your preferences, your needs, your values get buried under theirs. Suddenly, you're living a life shaped by manipulation rather than by choice. That is the cost of handing over power. You stop being the author of your own story. The hardest truth to accept is that manipulators can only succeed if you participate. They cannot take your boundaries without you letting them fall. They cannot override your decisions unless you let their voice be louder than your own. They cannot force you to question your reality unless you agree to believe their version of it. The trap is not built by them alone. It's reinforced every time you choose their comfort over your clarity. When people say, "This person controls me," what they often don't realize is that control exists because they have allowed it, even unconsciously. Yes, the manipulator pushes, pressures, and deceives, but the moment you stop yielding, the dynamic changes. Power is never stolen. It's surrendered. And every surrender creates a habit until giving in becomes your default response. That's when manipulation becomes almost invisible, because it feels like normalcy. You don't notice the chains when you're the one fastening them link by link. You justify, you rationalize, you excuse their behavior, telling yourself it's not worth the fight. But every excuse is another link, another piece of control handed over without resistance. Manipulators are patient. They don't need to take it all at once. They only need you to keep making those small concessions until you wake up one day and wonder how you lost yourself in the process. Recognizing this is uncomfortable because it means facing the reality that you are not powerless. You have been complicit in the handover of your own power. That doesn't mean you deserve the manipulation or that you asked for it, but it does mean you need to take responsibility for where you've allowed it to happen. Awareness is the first step in reclaiming power, because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it's out of your control. Manipulators depend on your blindness. They depend on your silence. They depend on your willingness to keep giving them chances, to keep forgiving, to keep hoping they'll change. But change never comes because the current dynamic benefits them. Why would they let go of power you willingly hand over? The shift begins when you stop participating in your own disempowerment, when you stop responding to guilt trips, when you stop explaining your every move, when you stop justifying your boundaries as if they need someone else's approval. That's when the handover reverses. That's when you stop giving away pieces of yourself for someone else's comfort. That's when you realize the power was yours all along, and it was never theirs to take. Stop confusing empathy with obligation. The line between those two is where most people lose themselves. Empathy is one of the most powerful qualities you can have. It's the ability to see, feel, and understand someone else's experience. It's what connects us, what makes relationships meaningful, and what allows us to support one another as human beings. But when empathy gets tangled with obligation, it stops being a strength and turns into a trap. That's exactly where manipulators thrive, because they know if they can make you feel responsible for their emotions, their struggles, and their choices, you will carry their weight while ignoring your own. You can care for someone without carrying their entire life on your shoulders. Yet many people don't know where to draw that line. You see someone hurting, and your natural instinct is to help. You see someone struggling, and you feel compelled to step in. That's empathy. But when someone uses your kindness as leverage, when they make you feel guilty for not doing more, when they suggest that your love should be proven by sacrifice, that's obligation. And obligation without choice is manipulation. Imagine a friend who constantly complains about their problems, but never makes an effort to change. You listen, you console, you advise, you rearrange your life to be there every time they call. At first, it feels like compassion. But over time, you notice they never show up for you in the same way. They don't check in. They don't ask how you're doing. They don't offer support. What's happening is not mutual care. It's a one-way transaction fueled by your inability to separate empathy from duty. You feel guilty stepping back because you've convinced yourself that being a good person means being endlessly available. But what's really happening is that you're being used under the guise of kindness. Empathy becomes dangerous when it's manipulated into a debt you're expected to pay. A manipulator might say things like, "If you really cared, you'd do this for me," or "I thought you were different, but I guess I was wrong." Those words are designed to twist your empathy into obligation. You find yourself agreeing to things you don't want, giving more than you can afford, and neglecting your own needs, all because you don't want to be seen as uncaring. That's not empathy anymore. That's submission dressed up as compassion. The danger is that society often reinforces this confusion. People praise selflessness. They glorify sacrifice. They talk about love as if it means putting everyone else before yourself. But selflessness taken to the extreme leaves you empty. True empathy doesn't mean abandoning your boundaries. It means supporting others while still honoring your own well-being. The moment you feel resentment building, the moment you feel drained instead of connected, that's a signal you've crossed from empathy into obligation. Manipulators are experts at spotting those signals in you. They see your sensitivity, your desire to help, your fear of letting people down, and they use it to keep you tied to them. They don't need to demand directly. They just need to hint at disappointment and you rush to fix it. They don't need to beg. They only need to suggest that without you, they'll fall apart. That suggestion is enough to keep you hooked because your empathy makes you feel responsible for outcomes that were never yours to manage in the first place. The truth is, empathy is a gift, but it is not a contract. You can feel someone's pain without being required to solve it. You can care about someone's struggles without carrying them on your back. The minute you turn empathy into an obligation, you lose the essence of what empathy is supposed to be: free, compassionate, human connection. Obligation distorts it, turning what should be an act of choice into a chain of expectation. Think of all the times you've said yes when you wanted to say no. You didn't agree because you wanted to. You agreed because you didn't want someone else to feel bad or disappointed or angry with you. That's the moment empathy turns against you. It no longer reflects your true intention. It becomes a shield you use to protect yourself from guilt or conflict. But in protecting others from discomfort, you're sacrificing your authenticity. You're showing up in ways that drain you, which means what you're giving isn't genuine. It's coerced by obligation. And here's the real danger: when you live this way for long enough, you start to lose track of your own needs altogether. You define yourself by how much you do for others. You believe your worth is tied to your usefulness. You think love is measured in sacrifice. You no longer know the difference between helping out of choice and helping out of fear. That blur keeps you stuck in relationships where you're giving everything and receiving little to nothing in return. Empathy is supposed to connect you, but when it's fused with obligation, it isolates you. You become the person everyone depends on, but no one truly sees. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel alone because no one is really interested in your inner world. They're only interested in what you can give them. This dynamic continues until you decide that empathy does not require self-betrayal. Until you realize that saying no doesn't make you unkind, it makes you balanced. Until you accept that people's disappointment is theirs to manage, not yours to absorb. What manipulative people fear the most is when you finally separate empathy from obligation. Because when you do, you can still care for them, but you're no longer controlled by them. You can still feel for them, but you no longer lose yourself in them. You can still love, but now it comes from strength, not from guilt. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Too many people walk through life believing they are entitled to respect simply because of who they are, the role they hold, or the position they claim. They think respect comes automatically with age, authority, or titles. But genuine respect cannot be forced, and it cannot be faked. It comes from how you treat others, how you carry yourself, and how consistent you are with your values. The moment someone tries to demand respect through fear, manipulation, or intimidation, what they actually receive is compliance, not respect. Compliance fades the second their control weakens, but respect lasts when it's truly earned. Real respect is built in the smallest of interactions. It's in how you listen when someone else speaks. It's in how you handle disagreements without belittling others. It's in whether your actions line up with your words. People are always observing, even when you don't realize it. They notice when you keep your promises. They notice when you take responsibility instead of blaming. They notice when you treat people with dignity, not just when it benefits you, but especially when there's nothing to gain. That's where respect is born, in those everyday choices that reveal your integrity. Manipulators often try to shortcut this process. Instead of earning respect, they attempt to demand it. They pressure you to agree with them. They shame you into silence, or they expect obedience simply because they say so. And if you resist, they accuse you of being disrespectful, as if respect is something you owe them no matter how they behave. This is a trap, because once you accept that version of respect, you're no longer dealing with mutual understanding. You're submitting to control. Respect that is demanded is nothing more than fear disguised as authority. Think of the leaders, mentors, or even friends in your life who truly had your respect. It wasn't because they shouted the loudest or forced you to comply. It was because they carried themselves in a way that made you want to follow them. They didn't need to remind you of their authority. Their consistency and fairness spoke for them. Respect flows naturally toward people who live with integrity. And it flows away from those who pretend they deserve it without ever putting in the work to earn it. The mistake many people make is confusing fear with respect. Fear can make people obey, but it never creates loyalty. You might follow someone's rules because you're scared of the consequences, but the moment their control slips, your loyalty vanishes. Respect, on the other hand, builds loyalty that lasts even when authority isn't present. That's why real respect has far more power than intimidation ever will. Fear silences people in the moment, but respect inspires them to stand with you even when you're not in the room. In personal relationships, this principle is just as critical. If someone constantly tells you to respect them while dismissing your feelings, they don't actually want respect. They want submission. Respect cannot be one-sided. It cannot be extracted through guilt, threats, or manipulation. If you're the only one giving while the other person is only taking, that isn't respect. It's exploitation. And exploitation only survives when you mistake it for something noble. The foundation of respect is reciprocity. You give it, and in healthy relationships, you receive it back. That doesn't mean you'll never disagree, but it does mean your voice will still matter even when opinions clash. When someone respects you, they don't have to agree with you to value your perspective. When someone demands respect without offering it, they're not looking for equality. They're looking for control. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you teach people how to treat you. When you excuse it, justify it, or stay silent about it, you communicate that your boundaries can be crossed without consequence. And once that cycle begins, it rarely stops on its own. The only way to shift it is by recognizing that respect is not something you owe to everyone who asks for it. It is something you grant, and it has been earned through behavior. Respect also has nothing to do with how much you sacrifice. Some people believe the more they give, the more respect they'll receive. But manipulators don't value your sacrifices. They exploit them. You cannot buy respect with endless patience, forgiveness, or self-denial. You cannot earn it by making yourself smaller to keep others comfortable. In fact, the more you diminish yourself for others, the less respect you often receive. People respect strength, boundaries, and authenticity, not submission. It's also important to recognize that respect is not loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. The people who truly command respect are often the ones who lead quietly, who let their actions speak, and who don't waste energy trying to convince others of their worth. Those who constantly demand recognition are often the ones who haven't earned it. True respect doesn't need to be shouted. It is given freely by those who witness consistency and authenticity over time. The challenge comes when someone you care about refuses to understand this distinction. They may demand your respect while showing you none. They may twist the narrative so that standing up for yourself looks like disrespect. But real respect never requires you to abandon your self-respect. If honoring them means betraying yourself, that is not respect. That is control. Respect exists only when both sides maintain dignity, not when one person holds all the power and the other is silenced. Respect is not about titles, age, or demands. It is about character. It is shown in the choices you make when no one is watching, in the way you treat people who can do nothing for you, and in the consistency of your actions over time. Those who live with integrity never need to chase respect, but it finds them naturally. Those who lack integrity will keep demanding it, yet they'll never receive the genuine respect they crave because it cannot be forced into existence.